something and like start disliking what I've written. So I'll leave it, and then I come back to it, and then I read it like an audience. And when I read it like an audience, I'm like, did I plagiarize this? Like I kind of remember this. Is this from something else? But I think it's probably, I'm not going to pretend to have the best advice to you about writing, so take this with a grain of salt, but I would say don't worry about that. When, like, just try to write what you're writing and worry about that later. Like, I think that's a valid concern, but it's not one that you should have in the front of your mind. Maybe have it when you read it over.
I think that's a wise answer. You said you weren't going to have great advice, but I think that was actually excellent advice. Okay, so Karen, our buddy Karen, hi Karen, has a question. She hasn't yet read the book, but she wants to understand where the title came from and how it fits with the story. You sort of learn that pretty quickly in the book, but when did you land on this title? Was it part of the publishing team that led you to this title? Tell us, if you can, the backstory.
Yeah. So my editor helped me come up with the title. It's a line from the book. It's something that the priest says during Mass. It is very topically related to the book, and it's not a spoiler to know that the main character is sort of having an existential crisis and is very focused on how everyone around her is going to die and how she's going to die and how sort of strange it is to act like everything's normal when you know that, and to she's like very intensely aware of how like insignificant but also important everything is. So that's sort of the tone. So I'm very happy with the title. My agent worked on it with me. That's how it came to be. So I can't take full credit for it.
And I like the little hopping bunnies too.
Me too.
Nice little
anxious little rabbits. Yeah.
Little anxious rabbits hopping around. Troy says, I want to hear about the thematic hands, and then includes the quotation, I am staring intensely at my own hands. I am zeroing in on the wrinkles in my knuckles and the veins beneath my skin. I will never have any other hands but these. So I guess Troy is just looking for some behind, like this is like VH1 behind the music, that particular passage.
Yeah, so I was using hands as sort of a way of her being so aware that she like physically exists, and and how, like, especially when you're feeling very anxious, and this is something that I would probably pull for myself, and you sort of look down at your hands, and particularly in a Catholic church. Like, I remember I grew up Catholic, and I remember we had little hand games because you had to sit through church. It was long, and there's little games like you'd fold your fingers and do certain things with your hands. So I think of like feeling anxious and looking down at your hands and being like, and your hands sort of being a reminder that you exist physically, right? Because we don't see ourselves from within ourselves, and your hands are probably the part of you that you see most of yourself. So yeah, I was trying to use the hands as a way of saying like you are a physical, living, breathing creature. And here's a constant reminder of that, and your hands are going to change. And like I can remember what my hands looked like when I was a kid, and sometimes I think it's strange to look down at my hands now and think like, I remember looking at my hands and them being different. And even now, like I'm 31 now, and my hands are starting to not be exactly as fresh as they were when I was like 15. And I'm like, oh, that's so strange, like to see something you see every day gradually change. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
it does. Troy is chiming in that Troy's obsessed with hands because of, I always mispronounce this poet's name. Rilke. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Hand love. And I don't know if you've watched the trashy television show Younger, but in it, a 40-something is trying to masquerade as a 27-year-old, and the giveaway is her hands. They're like, whoo, keep those hidden. Okay, Sarah says, it's interesting to hear about the changes that the book went through in editing. do you think any of that, going through that process, will affect how you write in the future? So are there things, you sort of alluded to this idea of maybe lowering a shield, that, you know, the shield a little bit. But are there other new things that you learned that maybe you'll take into your next work?
For sure. I think, you know, I think the editing process is such a nice learn, like that's a really, it's sort of like an added bonus of getting a book published, is that you really learn something, like little things. Like I remember, and this might be common, I don't know, you know, I'm not an expert at anything, but like not being so, like saying they said or she says rather than she, you know, chortled or something, like trying to pick some word that describes it better because it's distracting. So I've been doing that when I write now. I don't do that. And another thing that I've found is that, and who knows if this is even true, but when you're editing, like you'll get like an editorial letter and they'll tell you like, oh, here's some things I want you to do. Like I want you to flesh out this relationship, for example, or whatever. And I'm an anxious person, and I have a job and I have all these other things. And so I feel like when I get a task, I'm like, oh, I have to do that task. Like it's on my mind. I have to do that task. And I don't want to be slow in doing this task either. I want to be like, I got it right back to you. And now it's off my mind. I don't have to worry about it anymore. So when I got those, I would action them quickly. And when I write, I don't do things. I tend to read, like I read the first page of my book probably a million times. Like it's not an efficient way of writing, but that's how I normally do it. But I found in the editing, I didn't do that. I would just write it quickly and send it to them. And I've noticed like the passage about falling in space was one of the things that I wrote quickly. And I've noticed that I get like sort of more positive feedback about the things I didn't overthink. So I might try to stop. I don't know if I can now, but I'm going to try to stop overthinking and reading over everything and just sort of accepting it a little bit more as it comes out.
I have a question. Actually, I have two questions of my own, if you don't mind taking those. Yes. And they both have to do with choices that you made as a writer. So was this book always written in the present tense? I mean, it clearly takes you right into her experience, in part because it's unfolding as the story. So did it start out that way?
It did, yeah. I was trying to, like, I had like a very high level idea of what I wanted to do with this book. And I did want it to be like, oh, you're in the mind of someone who's anxious. Like, and when you read this, like you're going to feel what it's like to be anxious as much as I would be able to do that. So for me, I don't know that I could have done that if I didn't write it in first, you know, because anxiety is so like, you know, like it's very personal and in the moment, and you know, and it would, I don't know that it would, maybe I just wouldn't be able to do it, but for me, that lends itself best to that perspective and time.
Mm-hmm. But one of my favorite pieces as I've been reading are these very short little flashbacks, like the dead rabbit, which happens very quickly. And so were those pieces layered in later, or did they sort of naturally come as you're writing scenes? You create this backstory that helps provide some context for her anxiety as it's built.
I think they mostly came as I was writing. I do like, I think that is sort of a writing style, because I find I do that even now, like when I'm trying to write something new, I tend to do that. I don't know, like I tend to think of, because a lot of what I'm trying to do when I'm writing is like, I don't know if I'm doing this that consciously, but let's just say that I am, is to, like I like to read so I can feel empathy for someone. Like I like to understand what it's like to be someone else. And that's a bit like lately I've been reading a lot of trans writers because I don't know what it's like to be trans. And I've really loved reading that because I'm like, oh, I get this so much more now. And I didn't get it at all before. And anyway, so I think when I'm writing a character, I think like, why are they doing that? And I immediately think of why they're doing that. And like, you know, like, so if they behave this way, in my head, I'm trying to think like, oh, well, what happened to them that made them behave that way? And then I immediately put it there. And so it did kind of, there were some things that I fleshed out more, like I thought of the rabbit right, like I think I wrote that first section and that's how it was. Like when I first was writing it, it was the first section and there's the rabbit is mentioned like right on the first page, I think. And that was the first thing. That was how the page was when I originally wrote it. I think there are other parts where the rabbits later put that I didn't put it, but the original like connection was sort of natural.
Aimée already asked, how potentially elements of you kind of have seeped into Gilda. I'm wondering if the reverse is at all true. If like rooting yourself so firmly in her world and psyche impacts the way you walk around. Like, are you much more physically aware of our fragility on a day-to-day basis after writing the book?
That's a good question. I do find out, like I was just saying, like I am a little bit more like leaning into being a little bit more like I think Gilda's quite kind-hearted and like and I think I guess I am, but I wouldn't have said that I was. And I am sort of like leaning into that a little bit more. So it is, I think that's a good question. I think she has probably affected me in that way, in a positive way, more so than I would have been more likely to have the being aware of myself physically. That's a part of Gilda that's sort of a little more on my side of our Venn diagram to begin with. But the nicer parts of her, I do like. I am kind of leaning into a little bit more.
That's good.
Good question. Yeah.
A good takeaway, I would say.
Yeah.
Aimée, I'm going to turn it on to you for a minute. Since you are our resident, you like to set people up with blind dates on books. What are some of the other books that you feel like should be on dates with this particular one? What do you put this one with?
It's funny that that you mentioned mostly dead things, Emily, because whenever you're told like, okay, this is where your book is gonna sit, right? Like your comps, like the books that are gonna be like yours, where you sit on the shelf. I was given that one too. So that makes me feel even more.
We're connected. Yeah.
But it's that same vibe. It's like I would say your book and like Godshot by Chelsea Baker, like these books that are, okay, so I don't know if anyone's read Who Will Man the Frog Hospital, I believe, or does anyone remember that book? It was like a 90s book. I really hate using the word like irrelevant. Like I feel like that has like a negative connotation. It's not that. It's like it's these novels about feelings, like these novels that are not like sweeping like sagas, but yeah, like and it's weird because the more that I read these books in this category, which I'm just gonna say like these like expose novels, they do seem to be queer characters or female driven, like female narrated characters. I don't know if that's like anything. I don't know if it's just coincidence. We the Animals by Justin Torres. These not so much coming of age stories because the characters are adults or young adults. It's just these like these moments in our lives that we are able to express in long form, whereas in conversation we may not have had the confidence or the wherewithal to talk about. Like we need these longer spaces that we can like really transcribe, like this is how it feels to be XYZ. And I think more and more these books are coming in. Mostly Dead Things, I don't know if anyone's read that. That's literally about a woman in Florida who becomes a taxidermist, and she's sinking so far into her sadness that she is like running over exotic animals to like make money. But it's like wrapped in this dark humor, so we forgive her in a way. Like that feeling of like, well, what do people do every day, right? What are these like little stories that happen every day? I'd like to hear about those, because I want to, like what you were saying earlier about having empathy for a character. sometimes, you know, like a big blockbuster book will come in and I think, well, I don't really want to read it right now because I can't empathize with this person because they're like a captain of a starship. When someone writes a book about like, hey, I feel really anxious and like I don't really know where I fit in and I'm worried about my family, you're like, ooh, I wonder how this person is going to handle it. And then it's like that writer's gift of like, and the reader's gift of that symbiotic thing of you don't feel alone.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes these quieter novels can make you feel less alone, you know. The same way like a huge book can again take you away and you're like in like a fantasy world, but I think each has their own merit. So I would, if anyone wants similar titles to Emily's, like I'm the person to come to, you all know my staff pick. We're gonna have like these kinds of narratives because I think they're just so important. And clearly people want to read them because we're all here and we're all like picking your brain. And again, it's like a very brave thing to talk about anxiety. It's a taboo word. No one likes to say they're anxious. You've written an entire book on anxiety and you've made it funny and you've made it not scary.
Oh, thank you.
Which I think is like a huge thing to do. And I don't know how long it took you to write this. I mean, was it like immediate or was it like years? Were you like, you know, honing it?
Yeah, well, I would like, it's hard to say like how long it would take. I think it took about a year. But I was trying, when I was writing this book, I did sort of intentionally, like normally I don't, like I've always had sort of a compulsion to write things, but I never think like, oh, how am I actually going to write a story? Like I never had that in mind. I was sort of just acting on the compulsion to write something. But with this, I was like, oh, I should try to package this, right? And so I was like, okay, so what, at a very high level, what's this story about? And then I thought of what the story was about in just like 3 sentences. And that's actually a really helpful way of writing for when you're going to try to, you know, get your book published, when you reach out to, like, I think when I did email my literary agent, I wrote what was written at that time. Like I didn't have the stress of having to summarize the book. It was already summarized.
Elevator pitch.
Yeah, but I was thinking, like, I tried to think of what would be sort of easy for me to write, because I have like a day job and other things. And, you know, so I was like, okay, if I want to write a book, I was raised Catholic. That's an easy thing for me to write about. I have an anxiety disorder. It's not going to be hard for me to write about someone who feels incredibly anxious. I think at the time that I wrote this, it was pretty recent that my grandparents, who I was very close with, died. So it was already like, I've got the thoughts. I can lean into these, and I'm already going to be spiraling through them. So I might as well try to make them productive for myself. So because of that, it didn't take me that long to write the book. But I think it was because I was picking my easiest ingredient on my shelf to write from.
Well, hey, that's perfect for a debut, because then it's like you're giving the world, you know, yourself, right? You're not dressing it up in any way. You're giving like all these things that make up you. So it's like the best way to do it, I think. You know, it's like you're setting the bar, right? You're exposing yourself in the best way.
And to follow on that thought, Emily, I'm curious, right before everybody hopped on the call, I sort of said, like, this has to be such a strange week, you know, books, it's such a long project, right? You write it, you edit, it just takes time to get to Tuesday when it released to the world. And certainly you have advanced readers, you have folks who blurb the book, you have tremendous praise from really wonderful members of the literary community. But what does it feel like to let go of the book and let it be out in the world? And just talk to us about what that experience has felt like this week.
Yeah, so it's been really lovely to have, like, if there's sort of a relief to it, but I do like, I'm an anxious person, obviously. And so I am sort of, and I've heard someone said before, like, when you're anxious, you're very in the future. And when you're depressed, you're very in the past. And when you're mentally well, you're very in the moment. I'm not at all in the moment. So I couldn't tell you. It'll probably take me a little while to register. Like right now, I still am sort of just like, I'm not really, I haven't really processed that anything, especially because I'm also deep. I'm really happy to be at this event, so don't take this the wrong way, but when you have events and things, your mind is just like, oh, I hope I don't miss that event. I hope I got the time zone right. And that's what I'm thinking about more than I am that anyone's reading the book. And I do have I don't have very much, I don't know. I feel like I'll feel relief once I register it, more so than anything else, because and no matter what, even if everyone said they hated the book, I don't think it would bother me that much, to be honest. I think I would just be relieved that I've completed something.
Yes, quite an achievement. Troy chimes in to say the second Detransition Baby as a fantastic read, and also would put this book on the shelf next to Otessa Moshfegh's Death in Her Hand.
Really nice.
And Ocean Vuong's On Earth Were Briefly Gorgeous.
Those are both very flattering books
Embarrassed
to name. Thank you very much.
high praise. I love that. Listen, we would love, those of you who are here, we would love to give the opportunity for each of you, if you have purchased or are planning to purchase the book, we would love to set up a virtual signing line for Emily, Emily, don't worry, we got this.
I'll be fine. It's okay. I got it.
But the way that this is going to work is in just a moment, I am going to put Emily in a breakout room. And then if you would like to stick around, she doesn't have your books, but she does have book signing book plates. There they are. And if you would like a personalized inscription, please stick around and we'll put you in that room one at a time so that you can speak to Emily in person, congratulate her on this fantastic release, and get a personalized book plate that she will then send to us. I am certainly gonna stick around. I will go last, I promise, and have mine signed, because I was telling Emily before the event began, as booksellers and people who work in the book world, we have to set a very clear criteria for actually purchasing books ourselves to own. Otherwise, we would drown in books. And this is one that I have actually purchased for myself and will become a part of my permanent library because I like that much. So, Emily, thank you so much for being here. Aimée, thank you so much for being here for this, blind date with a writer, sort of. And everyone who's here, if you'd like to turn your videos on to wave hello. If you'd like to exit now, you're welcome to. If you want to stick around, please stick around. And we will get the signing line started momentarily. I see Venitra waving.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks for being here, everybody. All right, Emily, I'm going to send you off into the room.
Okay.